Welcome to Reading with Ryan. On today's episode, we're going to look at a book which has meant a great deal to me personally in my spiritual and intellectual journey. I first read this book in spring 2018, and I've returned to it time and again over the last 7 years. The book by Seyyed Hossein Nasr of George Washington University is The Garden of Truth, published in 2007 by HarperOne. Seyyed Hossein Nasr needs no introduction for those already familiar with him, but for those who may not yet have read his works, he stands at the very pinnacle of international Islamic scholarship. He is the author of over 50 books and hundreds of academic articles. He is the leading foremost exponent of the traditionalist perennialist school, which is a particular philosophical school, and he is also actively involved on a personal spiritual level in Sufism, or Islamic mysticism. I dislike that term, but I use it for want of perhaps a more immediately accurate or accessible one. But Seyyed Hossein Nasr has dedicated his life to expounding on the principles of Sufism to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And he wrote this book primarily to convey the quintessence of Sufism as a lived, accessible spiritual reality for over 1,000 years in the Islamic tradition. It is alive and well today throughout much of the Muslim world, although it is no longer quite as central as perhaps it was only 100 years ago, when the vast majority of Muslims were in some way directly identified with, either through theoretical or practical means, the practice and the beliefs associated with Sufism, or Tasawwuf in Arabic. This book is singularly one of the most beautiful that I have ever read in my life, and that is not hyperbolic on my part. If you pick it up yourself, you will find that regardless of what perspective you come from and bring with you to the book, the prose itself is simply magnificent. Seyyed Hossein Nasr himself is a poet, both in English and in Persian, his original language, native language, and also in Arabic. And so the book itself is replete with quotations from some of the leading Sufi poets and saints throughout the centuries, from Ibn Arabi in Arabic to Rumi and Sa'di in Persian, and many, many others beside. And it is truly one of the most exquisitely beautiful, piercingly beautiful texts that I have read. And so I'll share with you just some excerpts from it. In his introduction, he writes, "The present book is the result of over 50 years of both scholarly study of and existential participation in Sufism. Providence has made it possible for me to visit many Sufi sites from the Atlantic to the Pacific, to encounter numerous Sufi masters, to participate in almost countless Sufi gatherings, and to read and study many Sufi works and scholarly writings about Sufism by scholars of both East and West. My goal in this book, however, is not to present a history of Sufism, or just an academic work on the subject, although I have sought to be scholarly to the best of my ability. My aim is rather to present to the reader a Sufi text written in English and using contemporary language." This is an important distinction because, as he notes later on in the introduction and in many other of his books, there has been in the last 30 to 35 years a flowering of academic texts by Western authors in Western languages about Sufism, but there have been fewer texts, and this was one of the first major bestsellers in English that was such a text, of books that were not just simply addressing Sufism in an academic, detached way, but speaking from within the Sufi tradition. So Dr. Nasr is a sheikh, he is a pir, a leader of a Sufi order, and this is well known at this point. And so he comes at this book, to this book with a lived experience of someone who studied and practiced Sufism under several different masters, great masters, in living Sufi traditions. And so he brings academic rigor as well as his background in history and poetry and philosophy especially, and joins that to the lived practical experience of realizing the dimensions of the Sufi life and guiding others on that particular path. He continues, in purely academic works, one relies only on written sources or field reports based on external observation, whereas this book, while using written historical sources, issues from the lived reality of Sufism, the experience of Sufi spirituality, the all-important centuries-old oral tradition, and truths that are meta-historical. I felt obliged to write this book because I believe that after some 2 centuries of study of Sufism in the West, with the appearance of many translations, analyses, histories, and some profound expositions of Sufi metaphysics, and given an ever greater interest in Sufism by certain Westerners, it is necessary to write not just another book about Sufism, but a Sufi book. It is necessary to present the reality of Sufism as did the authorities of old, but in a manner accessible to the present-day serious Western seeker or Western-educated Muslim seeker, even if such a person has no previous knowledge of the subject. In this book I have dealt with universal truths of interest to those attracted to the life of the spirit, and in light of the human condition in general, presenting them from within the spiritual and intellectual universe of Sufism, while providing a means of access to that universe and revealing some of its riches. Then, when he speaks of the title of the book, which is The Garden of Truth, I found this to be particularly beautiful. The title of this book, The Garden of Truth, is drawn from the traditional Islamic symbolism of the garden. The traditional Islamic garden is an earthly reflection of paradise, and the word paradise itself comes from the Middle Persian word paradis, meaning garden, and it is also the origin of the Arabic word firdaus, meaning both paradise and garden. Using the symbol of the garden, the Quran refers to paradise itself as the garden. Moreover, the sacred text speaks of levels of paradise. The Sufis have drawn from this symbolism and speak of the garden as designating not only the various levels of paradisal realities, but also the divine reality beyond paradise as usually understood. The highest garden is associated with the absolute truth, which is one of the names of the divine essence. Hence, we can speak of the garden of truth as that reality wherein all the spiritual realities are gathered. The Sufis also speak of the gardener as God in his absolute and infinite reality, and of Jannat al-Dhat. Sufism is a vast reality that provides the means for those who follow its tenets to reach the garden of truth. It is the path to the garden, and on the highest level, and in its inner reality, the content of the garden, as well as the means of reaching the presence of the gardener. The Sufi tradition contains a vast metaphysical and cosmological set of doctrines elaborated over a long period by Sufi teachers and masters of gnosis. It contains methods of spiritual realization that address nearly all the different spiritual possibilities on the levels of action, love, and knowledge, and this is the format that he follows throughout the book. It is preserved over many centuries, and going back to the Prophet, a regular chain of transmission of initiatic power, walaya or wilaya, and the grace, al-barakah, necessary for the spiritual journey. And above all, it can enable men and women to reach the state of sanctity. Chapter 1 begins as follows. It's titled, What It Means to Be Human. Who are we, and what are we doing here? Then there are 2 quotes. The first from the Quran, Am I not your Lord? Alastu bi rabbikum, in Arabic. They said, Yea, verily, we bear witness. Bala shaydina. This is Quran, chapter 7, verse 172. Then there's a Persian prose quote from Ali Shustari. After extinction, Bana, after extinction I came out, and I, eternal now am, though not as I. And who am I, O I, but I? The chapter begins as follows. The unavoidable question. Wherever we are, and in whatever time we happen to live, we cannot avoid asking the basic questions of who we are, where we came from, what we are doing here, and where we are going. In everyone's life, especially when one is young, these basic questions arise in the mind, often with force, and demand answers from us. Many simply push them aside or remain satisfied with established answers provided by others in their family or community. In traditional societies, such answers always came from the teachers of religion, and to a great extent they still do for the majority of people in many parts of the world. But there have always been, and still are today, the few who take the question, "Who am I?" seriously and existentially, and who are not satisfied with answers provided by others. Rather, they seek to find the answers by themselves, trying with their whole being to delve into the inner meaning of religion and wisdom. They continue until they reach the goal and receive a response that provides for them certitude and removes from them the clouds of doubt. In any case, how we choose to live in this world, how we act and think, and how we develop the latent possibilities within us, depends totally on the answer we provide for ourselves to this basic question of who we are, for human beings live and act, for the most part, according to the image they have of themselves. Sufism addresses the few who yearn for an answer on the deepest level to the question of who they are, and in a manner that would touch and transform their whole being. The Sufi path is the means within the Islamic tradition of finding the ultimate answer to this basic question and of discovering our real identity. Moving to page 57, he writes, "The knowledge of the truth and deliverance. Knowledge of the truth is ultimately not only a theoretical understanding of concepts. It is above all a knowledge that is combined with faith and involves all that we are. It is efficacious if it transforms our whole being and transmutes our soul. It must therefore involve our whole being. We must know not only with our senses and mind, but above all with our heart, which is our center. The knowledge that delivers and frees is one that removes the veils of separation that have caused us to forget our real identity. It is a knowledge that removes forgetfulness of that divine reality, which is the source of all things, as well as residing at the center of our being, the self, with a capital S, of our self. To understand fully the truth is to become that truth. It is to cease to be what we are and become what we have always been, are, and shall be in the divine reality. To enter the garden of truth has as its condition transcending our limitations and becoming freed of the fetters of limited existence and the prison of ignorance. This is both the necessary condition for entering the garden and the result of entering that garden. Truth, when actualized through spiritual practice, delivers us from that prison and renders us free in the highest sense of the term. Metaphysical and cosmological truths outlined in this chapter are, according to the Sufis, theoria or vision of the real, as well as a roadmap to guide us through the cosmic labyrinth to the abode of the infinite and the eternal. They provide keys to open the doors to the expanses of the divine empyrean, that is, the highest celestial firmament. Once realized through divine guidance, these truths reveal themselves as not only knowledge of the real, but reality, haqiqa, in itself and in its manifestations, for truth is reality, knowledge is being. In one of his prayers, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, said, "O Lord, show us things as they really are." To attain the stage of realizing the answer to this prayer, which means to see things in their metaphysical transparency, as symbols and not only as facts, as reflections of God's names and qualities, as the self-disclosure of God rather than as veils, we must know who we are, which in turn means that we must know God, and all things, including ourselves, by God and through Him. Such a knowledge of necessity involves all that we are. It involves love and beauty, faith and righteous action. Its attainment requires spiritual discipline and following the path, which the Sufis call the tariqah. The truth is at once the beginning and end of the path. Its theoretical knowledge, that is, its beginning, enables us to know who we are, where we come from, and where we should be going. Its realization, which must also be combined with love and beauty, and which is the end and the goal of our life, brings access to the garden, whose entry is the ultimate purpose of human existence. And then a poem. The book of the Sufi is not the black ink of written words. It is none other than an unblemished heart, like snow. On page 60, in a subheading, The Role of Love and Beauty in the Spiritual Life, Nasr notes, journeying on the road to the Garden of Truth requires not only acquiring and realizing unitive knowledge, but also being immersed in love and attracted to beauty at its highest level. God has made possible for us human beings to gain access to Him not only through knowledge, but also through love and beauty. The garden is the garden of truth, but it is also the garden of love, whose beauty is above and beyond all that we can imagine or have experienced as lovable and beautiful here on earth. The gardener is also the beloved, who must not only be known, but also loved and contemplated in her infinite beauty, which consumes the beholder and leads to the ecstasy of union as well as ultimate peace. Men and women experience all kinds of love and behold many beautiful objects in this life here below, but most do not reach the garden of truth through such experiences. We must therefore ask ourselves what love and beauty are in the context of Sufism, and why the Sufis, who emphasize so much principial and illuminative knowledge, speak so much of love and beauty, which are inextricably bound to each other. The path to the truth results in discovery of the truth, which means knowledge of it. Moreover, the truth is such that one cannot know it without loving it, and that love leads finally to the embrace of God, who in turn loves those among His servants who love Him. In the metaphysical sense, however, it is God's love that precedes human love, as we shall see. On page 72, Nasr writes, in Sufism, aesthetics is not separate from spiritual discipline and ethics. One cannot be carried on the wings of beauty to the freedom of the spiritual world without that discipline and without being aware and loving the absolute beauty of God for which the soul yearns, whether it is aware of it or not, in its quest of every form of earthly beauty. This quest cannot simply be carried out without ethical and spiritual discipline. As Plotinus, whom Muslims called the Sheikh, or spiritual master, of the Greeks, once said, the soul strives after beauty, and beauty is a manifestation of that spiritual power that animates all levels of reality. The Sufis agree completely with this view, which once dominated Western aesthetics, but was marginalized in the West, along with Neoplatonic teachings on the subject, in the 18th century. How is this beauty, after which the soul yearns, perceived and experienced? Since beauty resides in the depth of the soul, and at the same time the soul yearns for it, God has made possible its experience through all the faculties, both outward and inward, that belong to the soul. All of our external senses can experience beauty, especially our seeing and hearing faculties. In fact, most of the time when we refer to beauty, it is audible or visible beauty that we have in mind. But the inner faculties of the soul can also perceive beauty that is hidden from the eye of outwardness. The imaginal faculty can perceive beautiful images. The mind can behold the beauty of mathematical forms in the purely mathematical world independent of the material realm. It can also discern harmony, which is inseparable from beauty. The intellect that shines within us can contemplate the beauty of the purely intelligible world and the angelic realms. As for the heart, when its eye is opened, it can behold the beauty of the face of the beloved itself. Through whatever means our consciousness makes contact and becomes aware of objective reality, there is the possibility of experiencing beauty, a quality that permeates all levels and modes of existence. Although beauty is ubiquitous, whether we are aware of it or not, there is a hierarchy of beauty, as there is of reality, being, and love. The supreme beauty is the beauty of the supreme reality, God. Absolute beauty is the beauty of the absolute. Even the most intense beauty experienced in this world, in the beautiful face of a loved one, or a supreme work of art, or of virgin nature, or even the perfume of the soul of a saint, is a reflection of divine beauty. At once absolute and infinite, this beauty can be experienced but not described in human words, being a truly ineffable reality. This beauty is the crown of the hierarchy of beauty, and at the same time the source of every form of beauty. Below it in the hierarchy stands the beauty of the purely intelligible and angelic worlds, and below them the beauty of certain forms in the imaginal world, and then of the there's a slight typo here, and then of the sapio-temporal realm that reflect the archetypical and intelligible world most directly. On page 158, Nasr writes, on the subheading, Entry into the Garden of Truth, the Goal of Human Life. We were created to transcend the finitude and limitations of the human state. The mystery of our life on earth is not only that we are born, live, and die in a journey whose beginning and end we know not. It is also that within this horizontal journey we are given the possibility of wayfaring vertically beyond all the temporal and spatial accidents of our terrestrial existence. And it is essentially for the sake of making this second journey that we were put here on earth. This journey, which takes us to the abode of the One and the Garden of Truth, is the primary raison d'être of our existence in this world, and the end of the journey, the ultimate goal of human life. From one point of view, the journey, considered horizontally, seems to be long, but from the metaphysical point of view, which is based on the vertical dimension, it is nothing other than that single instant when we surrender ourselves to God and begin the path of ascent toward Him. We were created to know the Garden of Truth, and ultimately the Gardener Himself, and to reach it through the full realization of this knowledge. Sufism is one of the major paths that the Gardener has created within the framework of Islam to the garden. Surely there are other paths, and Sufism would be the first to attest to the universality of revelation, but we are concerned in this book with this particular path, and have sought to say something on the basis of this particular path about the nature of the garden and the gardener, the nature of the path to the garden, and the long and rich tradition that over the centuries has made possible journeying upon this path, and still does today. Let us then take advantage of the here and now to travel beyond all times and places before the hand of destiny removes from us the possibility of that vertical journey, which begins here and now, and finally returns to here and now, capital H, capital N. We travel to the there, capital T, only to discover that it is here, and to the future that is beyond earthly time, only to see that it is now. To make the journey to the garden means to go from here to there, and the fruit of the journey is the realization that there is here. That is why in the Quran, God addresses the prophet, "If my servant asks thee about me, truly I am near." That divine reality, the gardener, is near. We have only to realize his nearness. As for the garden of truth, like the gardener, it resides at the center of our being. Happy are those who are able to reach this garden while they are still in the human state and have the possibility of doing so. He closes then with a poem from Hafiz. O Saki, with the light of wine kindle our cup. O musician, play, for the world has to our wish surrendered. We have seen in the cup the image of the face of the friend. Oh, how ignorant thou art of the delight of our constant drinking. And here the metaphors of the wine and the cup and the drinking are metaphors for the intoxicating love of God. And the Saki, the cupbearer, ends up being called upon again and again to bring, without ceasing, that wine that is constantly desired by the revelers at the banquet. And so ultimately it is the wine that is the love of God Himself. I hope you've enjoyed that introduction to the Garden of Truth. Thank you so much for watching, and do subscribe to receive notifications of our next video. Thank you.